Thank you. All right, perfect. We're very privileged today to have back to Gilman Mr. Bob Thomas, who's going to talk to us about some important life lessons on honor and integrity, particularly in the world beyond Gilman. And what I thought I'd do is just to give you a little bit of background before bringing Mr. Thomas up to the stage, and I know you'll give him your undying attention. So Bob Thomas is an attorney in Boston and a member of Gilman's class of 1976. We'll get to the important things right away. He's married and has 2 daughters, a 21-year-old senior at Swarthmore College and a 16-year-old junior at Concord Academy. At Gilman, Mr. Thomas was president of his class, played 3 sports, and was chairman of the honor committee. After Gilman, he went on to Princeton University, where he majored in politics and graduated magna cum laude, which is a lot more Latin on his diploma than I ever had. He was an All-Ivy and All-American lacrosse player and was also president of his class and chairman of Princeton's honor committee. After Princeton, Mr. Thomas was on the faculty here at Gilman for a year, teaching U.S. history and French and coaching lacrosse and football. In 1982, he left Gilman to attend Harvard Law School, where he graduated in 1985 cum laude. Since then, Mr. Thomas has practiced law in Washington, D.C., in Baltimore, and for the last 13 years in Boston. He's been in private practice, he's been a public prosecutor, and he's been on the winning side of some significant legal cases. In addition to his work as a whistleblower lawyer, he's an adjunct professor of law at Boston University Law School, where he teaches a course on healthcare fraud and abuse. Today, he's going to share with us some of his insights from the battlefield and how often issues of honor and integrity surface in our lives and how we might deal with them most effectively. Mr. Thomas, welcome back to Gilman.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, and let me just say at the outset how honored I am to be here. It is a joy to be back at a school that has such a profound impact on me, and I'm touched to be asked to be here. I'd also like to acknowledge, just before we begin, some of the specific mentors and people in this community that had such a profound transformational impact on my life. The Reg Tickners, the Meredith Reeses, the Jerry Downs, the Larry LaPointes, the Claude Edelines, and of course the incomparable Reddy Finney. I'm honored that you're here today. These are people who had an amazing impact on me and all of our peers. And as you look back on your life a few decades later, most of us who went to this school feel that there were really important values and character development issues that happened here. And I just want to acknowledge that right up front and say thank you. So values and character development are really a lot of what I'm going to be talking about under the guise of the words honor and integrity, which, as you know, are 2 of the Gilman 5. And let me just say at the outset, I'm not speaking here as an expert on these issues. I don't think of myself in that way at all. It's simply that I have had a lot of life experiences where I've encountered these issues, and that's really what I want to share with you, is not so much what the rules are, because I think you know the rules already. It's really how do we make good decisions, and how do we avoid the kind of mistakes that we see people making when we pick up the newspapers and read about really crazy, wrong-headed things that smart people do. So, I know that as we talk on a Monday morning about lofty issues like honor and integrity, there's always a risk that people might say, oh boy, this is a little too heavy for a Monday morning. I'd really rather talk about the Ravens game. But as if to sort of prove the point, I picked up the morning paper this morning, and there's the headline that says, Ethics Board Gone AWOL. And so I think you'll see that if you actually look at some of these issues in the newspaper, there's almost every day there's some issue about where these issues of integrity come up in your lives. So let me just briefly say how these issues came to be sort of central in my life. And again, I didn't go looking for them. They found me. We all start off with our family values and our immediate circle of family, and I was blessed to have a father who cared a lot about integrity issues, and we talked a lot about them in part because what was going on at the time. When I was growing up, The country was deeply divided over a lot of issues, particularly the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, and Watergate. And there was all this moral hand-wringing about what's the right thing to do, and is it ever right to have a segregated society, and under what circumstances can we start a war in a far-off place, and when is that appropriate? And then we saw a presidency self-destruct for largely stupid and unnecessary reasons. So there was lots to talk about even as I was going to school. And then I was interested in leadership positions, both at Gilman and at Princeton, and what came with the leadership positions was something that I wasn't really thinking about so much, and that was the whole honor committee role. In both schools, if you were president of your class, you became chairman of the honor committee. So I found myself in these somewhat uncomfortable positions of trying to hear and understand what my peers had done right or wrong, and ultimately trying to pass some judgment on it, on those situations. That's an uncomfortable role, obviously. And then law school, there are whole courses on ethics. There's whole codes of conduct that govern the profession. And then I was a public prosecutor, as Mr. Smythe mentioned, in the Baltimore U.S. Attorney's Office, where at a very young age, relatively speaking, in my 30s, I'm asked to make prosecutorial discretion decisions about whom should be charged with what crimes, who should not be charged, and why. And you're asked in a fundamentally very difficult way to make hard life decisions that are going to have a huge impact on other people. And in my current incarnation, I represent whistleblowers. And this is really an outgrowth of what I did at the U.S. Attorney's Office. It has to do with fraud issues. And there is a law. The particular type of whistleblower I represent is False Claims Act whistleblower. And these are people who usually work for companies that have a contractual relationship with the government. And often these companies are doing something to game the reimbursement system that the government has in place. So these people are aware of fraud, and they're trying to stop it. And the law gives them a financial incentive for coming forward and letting the government know when it's been defrauded. So what's a whistleblower? So if you go to TAF.org, Taxpayers Against Fraud, you'll see this homepage. It's got Lincoln's face on it because Lincoln actually thought this law up in 1863 when the defense contractors were selling lame horses and rifles that didn't shoot to the Union Army. And so he said, we have to do something to incentivize people to come forward. So that was the False Claims Act, which then got amended in 1986. Since 1986, $40 billion has been recovered to the Treasury. That sounds like a lot of money, and it is, and this law has bipartisan support, but this is roughly 2% of the amount of fraud in healthcare alone that we think is out there. And I'll explain why in just a sec. So the way this works is a lawsuit is filed by a whistleblower attorney representing a whistleblower. It's filed under seal, which means it's not a public document. It's served on the government, the prosecutor's office, and they decide whether to intervene. They investigate the matter and decide whether to intervene and join the lawsuit as plaintiff or not. And at the end of the process, if there's a successful outcome, the whistleblower gets a percentage of whatever the government recovers, and that can be a very large amount of money, or it can be a zero, because 80% of these are not successful, but the 20% that are can be very, very substantial. So that's the background. Let me give you some examples of recent cases just in the last few years. These are not all healthcare cases, some of them are, and some of these are cases I've been directly involved in. But the scale of these is stupefying. If you look at this, GlaxoSmithKline, $3 billion in fines. Pfizer, $2.3 billion for kickbacks to doctors, off-label promotion of drugs, etc. Columbia Healthcare is a hospital chain that was upcoding, in other words, padding its bills to the Medicare and Medicaid system. Bank of America, $1.2 billion for peddling mortgage-backed securities that were rated AAA that they knew were junk. And then, again, two of these three I was involved in. Amgen, $780 million for bribing doctors to switch from competitors' drugs to their drugs. GlaxoSmithKline, again, manufacturing fraud, selling drugs out of their plant in Puerto Rico that they knew were substandard because of contamination issues at the plant. And Serono, a human growth hormone that was peddled to people in populations that were not part of the FDA approval. So while this is interesting in its own right, what I want you to focus on and let us to focus on together is what is going on here that companies that are run by smart, well-educated, trained people, some of whom have gone to very elite schools with honor systems like yours, what is going on here that they're paying historic billion-dollar fines? Something is amiss. First issue is, so why is there so much fraud? These are people who obviously know better. They're directing companies that have boards of directors. They're complex organizations that have general counsel's offices, compliance committees, and the like. Why is there so much fraud? All right, the first issue is it's easy. And this has to do with the vulnerability of honor systems. Honor systems are easy to game, as you know. It's like the strawberries on the side of the road. You take a box and put $2 in the box. If you want to not pay the $2, you're going to get away with it. It may not be the right thing to do, but it's easy to do. Similarly, all these government reimbursement programs are honor systems. Because of the millions and millions of claims every day, there's a political determination has been made that they have to be paid right away or the system will choke and doctors won't believe in Medicare and Medicaid anymore. So they pay them before they're able to check their accuracy. Well, it didn't take long for people to figure out that all you have to do is put in more claims than you're entitled to and the government pays them. The same thing is true with tax returns. If you put in a false tax return that says you're entitled to a refund, you'll get that refund. They may chase you later, but they'll pay it before they actually read the return. So it's easy, and that's the vulnerability of honor systems, and we'll come back later to why they're still important anyway, but it's easy to do. It's also extremely lucrative. As you've seen from the numbers I was putting on the board, there is a lot of money to be made playing these games. But fundamentally what you've got is decision makers who are making bad decisions. They are not, their moral compass has somehow gone off when they're making these decisions. And I can tell you from personal experience in these cases, when you really get right down to why the system broke down internally at these companies, it usually comes about for reasons like these. Greed is always a factor. Self-aggrandizement, looking good, puffing your performance to the board, etc. A particular vulnerability for people of privilege, and you in a sense are people of privilege by going to this kind of a school and having the opportunities that you have. That one of the downsides of this is that can lead to entitlement, a sense of entitlement or even arrogance. And then finally, somewhat more sympathetically, self-preservation. Sometimes people make really bad decisions just because they don't want to risk losing their job or their livelihood or their security. Now, if you were to ask the people who were involved in those cases I put on the board why they did what they did, they wouldn't give you these reasons. They'd give you some other reason, like I thought it was good for the company, or I didn't know it was wrong, et cetera, et cetera. But these companies don't write billion-dollar checks unless the government has good evidence of the knowledge of the wrongdoing. So this is, I think, what we're seeing is a breakdown, and even if 90% of people are compliant in the world, if 10% of companies are making bad decisions, you've got an awful lot of fraud on your hands. So lest you think this is just a high-level thing that's not applicable to you, let me explain how these issues might be coming your way. Today it might be what do I put on my Facebook page, or whether I turn in a friend who's been cheating, difficult moral dilemmas. But tomorrow it's going to be, or in the future it will be, do I report all this income on my taxes? Or if you're a lawyer, do I write down extra hours to make my billable hours look better to my boss, even though the client's going to pay for that? Or it might be, if you're a doctor, do I admit a serious medical mistake to a patient and apologize, even if I know that admission is going to have potential repercussions for me? And certainly as you get into the higher levels of public policy and government, there are huge moral issues about, for example, what types of circumstances justify a military intervention that will kill millions or hundreds of thousands of civilians. Dropping the atomic bomb is not an easy decision for a decision maker. It may help end a war, but it also will kill many, many innocent people. So these issues come to you whether you want them to or not. And as I said, I was interested in leadership, and then in my professional life I was interested in finding meaningful work and relevant work, I wasn't interested in finding moral dilemmas. They found me, and they will find you, I promise you. So what I think is, what I want to focus on in this short period of time is what are the tools we can have to analyze these issues when they come up. It's not enough to simply say, I believe in honor and integrity. You actually have to kind of break it apart a little bit and say, well, what are the actual analytical tools I need to figure these things out? I want you to consider that there are sort of two categories of conflicts. There's genuine moral conflicts, where you have a situation where two things that you really believe in are in collision. So you may think it's bad to lie, but you may also think it's bad to hurt people's feelings. Well, sometimes telling the truth hurts people's feelings, and that's what I would say is a genuine moral dilemma. Or my daughter at 4 years old produced this in the back seat of the car. She said, "It's a dilemma," and the babysitter said, "What?" And she said, "Well, you love hamburgers, but the poor cow." And she was right, it's a dilemma, and that's not an easy one to figure out. But then most of the issues that you're going to be dealing with are not genuine moral dilemmas. They're issues where you have a moral issue that is in conflict with some other impulse that is not on the same footing as that moral principle. So for example, you borrow your friend's car and you bang it up. And you're really not anxious to tell your friend that you have banged it up because it's going to cost you money and your friend's going to be mad at you and it's embarrassing, right? But when you think about the consequences of not telling him, not only is that wrong, but it's going to impact the friendship. It's pretty clear where you need to come out on that. And what we see in a lot of these corporate decisions is a failure of people to actually break these things apart and analyzing them. So I'm going to blitz through this really quickly because we have so little time. But if you were to take an ethics course in graduate school, you would see some of these types of terms being used to analyze these issues. Justice or fairness issues, autonomy or freedom, beneficence or kindness, utilitarianism, and workability. So you take something like the golden rule, do unto others as you would want done unto yourself. There's a significant loss of freedom in doing that. It may mean that you give up freedom to do what you want to do, but the other issues of justice and kindness and workability are clearly answered by that rule. And so these are some of the kinds of sort of big picture themes that help you analyze and rank and prioritize what these moral values are. And then finally, you've got, in any of these situations, you have to evaluate consequences. What's going to be the impact to me on this decision, and what's going to be the impact on other people. I would also suggest to you that language is important. You need to put names on these things and say why it is that, and in other words, articulate for yourselves what your core values are. Gilman has done that with the Gilman 5, but you can do that individually, and they don't have to be the same, and you all can have different personal hierarchies, but name them and say, who I am and what I want to be in life is these three things, and this is how I want to be remembered. And then when those moral conflicts come, you have an easier time, having articulated that to yourself and to the world, sorting these things out when there are conflicts. And doing an occasional accounting is not a bad idea. Now, a plug for honor systems. We talked earlier about how they're vulnerable, and they are vulnerable, but they still matter, and they particularly matter in these formative years. The reason they matter is they internalize the decision. The world is full of decision makers who are evaluating what you see on the left-hand side, which is, am I going to get caught? What are the chances of my going to jail if I do this? That's the wrong question. And what honor systems do is internalize the right question, which is, what is the right thing to do? And it's harder, and it's more challenging, but it gives you the opportunity, if you make the right decision, not to live with the toxicity of having done something that you're not proud of. So again, this is a fundamental dichotomy about thinking about issues based on whether I'm going to get caught or whether it's the right thing to do. And so even if honor systems don't stop cheating, and they never will stop all cheating, they still force us to ask ourselves what's the right thing to do. So when your time comes to evaluate these issues, and they will come, I promise you. You want some tools at the ready. And those tools, just to summarize here, is make yourself a declaration of values. And that's yours. It's not Gilman's, it's not anybody else's, it's yours. Who are you going to be and what's most important to you? State it to yourself, state it to the world. When there's a conflict, name it and say, well, I'm feeling this conflict and I want to do this because here's what it's going to do for me, but I don't want to do it because of this reason. And put names on that. It helps you sort through it. It helps you sort through whether this is a genuine moral conflict or whether this is something more basic that's easier to sort through. What are the consequences? You've got to factor that in, not just for yourself, but for the world and the people that are impacted by it. And two final points. Would I be able to explain this if I were making this decision in a public fashion? Most of these decisions you'll be making will be private, and you'll be wrestling with them yourself. But ask yourself, how would this look if it were on the front page of the newspaper? Would I still be making this decision? Would I still be proud of it? Many of these become a little more clear if you think about what they would look like under the light of day. I call that the newspaper test. And then finally, these issues are difficult, and it's hard to sort them out on your own. It's the importance of mentors and role models is critical. So have some mentors in your life. You've got some here on the Gilman faculty. As you go out into the professions, latch on to mentors that you admire and who you can talk to about these issues. And all of us in our lives have 3 or 4 or 5 people that we ask ourselves, well, what would that person say? Whether they're alive or dead, ask those people, what would you do in this situation? You've seen the bumper sticker, what would Jesus do? That has some relevance here. And there's 25 years of Gilman alumni from my generation who still are asking themselves in this situation, what would Reddy do? That's what WWRD is, okay? What would Reddy do in this situation? And I know Gilman alumni who have his picture on their walls, and they have that conversation whether they actually call up Mr. Finney or not. So those are the highlights. I'd love to talk about this at greater length, but I think the takeaway message here is while honor and integrity sound like very highfalutin terms, these issues are going to find you no matter what station you are in life and no matter what you're doing. Because if you're interested in having meaningful work lives, you're going to end up with responsibility, and what comes with responsibility is tough decisions. So hopefully this will give you a little sense of how you break those down. And again, I just want to thank you for having me, and I wish you great success at Gilman. I wish you great success in your careers, but most of all, I wish you lives of great commitment and integrity. So thanks for having me back.